feel free to keep eating here to talk. But I want to make a few announcements and introduce what may be unexpected, but a sort of bonus event for your program. So I just want to again welcome to Spring Arbor. Thank you. It's been a great first day of the conference, and I'm looking forward to tonight's keynote and to tomorrow with you all. And I also just want to thank Susan Felch, who's the Vice President of the Conference on Christianity Literature, and Ed Upton, who's the Midwest Director, for all their help organizing this. Thanks, Susan and Ed. And I cannot thank everybody at Spring Arbor who has been involved in this because there are too many. But thank you, certainly, the chair of our department, and Kimberly Moore-Juville, and the other members, and especially Jack Baker, Robbie Bolton, and Dan Train. They really helped me think through how to set this up and set the terms for a really healthy discussion. And also, if you see my wife Melissa, thank her because it's her birthday today, and she let me organize a conference on her birthday. So, as we started organizing this conference, we knew right away we wanted David Lau Jeffrey to be the keynote speaker because of his ongoing scholarship at the intersection of Bible and arts. He would be the perfect speaker to complement the St. John's Bible. And then as the proposals started coming in, we realized that a lot of his former students shared his passion. I guess his teaching was infectious, and would be gathering here for the conference. So, unbeknownst to David, and without his permission, we decided to put together a sort of panel or roundtable of former students to reflect on his influence as a teacher and mentor. David's influence as a scholar has been well recognized. He's received the CNL Lifetime Accomplishment Award. Just 2 years ago, Phil Donnelly and others edited a Festschrift. So he's been very influential as a scholar, and that's been recognized. But we want to reflect tonight on how he has influenced his pupils and how he models the traits of a good teacher. So we're not trying to we want to celebrate him, but we also want to reflect publicly on what is it that he has done that has made such a profound influence that will hopefully inspire those of us here who are teachers and those of us here who are students as well. So I'll start off, and then those of you who have prepared will follow. Norm MacLean, who, like David, you might know him as the author of A Run Story, right? Like David Jeffrey, is a descendant of Scottish immigrants, and he defines a great teacher in a way that I think is quite apt. A tough guy who cares deeply about something that is hard to understand. This is a pretty accurate description of David Jeffrey. He combines erudition with deep love, both for what he professes and to whom he professes. And his down-to-earth humor does not hurt either. As a grad student trying to figure out the genre of academic writing, I was put off by the dry obfuscation that characterizes most scholarly essays. Then I came across an essay on courtly love that begins with the racy locker room limerick. I cannot repeat it here. The whole essay, while very learned, was written in a lucid, straightforward style. This, I thought to myself, is how I write, and this guy is teaching at the institution I'm at. So recently, Jack and I wrote this piece that cites the Onion. And I thought, you know what? I've arrived. I'm citing good scholarly sources. As much as I admired his scholarly work, by the time I arrived at Baylor, David was not teaching graduate students. I finally worked up the courage to contact him and ask if there was any way I could get a course from him. He initially said no because of his other commitments and other reasons, but a few days later he emailed again and offered to give a group of us graduate students an independent study linked to a freshman course he was teaching. This willingness to make time for students characterizes David's teaching, even though he's a busy person with many important commitments. His generous gift of time challenges me when I want to cut off an annoying student or not make extra time to be with a student. Too often, I'm tempted to think that what I'm working on is more important than my students, and David's example to me reminds me now to be more giving of my time. On the first day of his freshman level literary Bible course, I think he spoke in at least 5 different languages. The freshmen were terrified. But at the same time, while quoting Psalm 19, he would be so overcome by the beauty of the scripture that he would tear up. And I think it's this combination of rigorous toughness with passionate tenderness that makes David such an influential teacher. For me personally, seeing this combination in him enabled me to imagine that I could aspire to be both an excellent scholar and a faithful Christian. Some Christian academics react to the anti-intellectual strain in the evangelical culture, which we heard about last night, by becoming cynical, arrogant, and dismissive of those who aren't smart. In the process, they lose any passion or love for the truth. Yet while David has certainly been hurt by some anti-intellectual Christians, he continues to model a deep love for God that is rooted in careful thought. So when he prays in the classroom, it's not perfunctory or extraneous, rather it's an integral part of the intellectual work that we conduct here. Being taught by David has challenged me to be tough and passionate, to have high standards for my students, but also to care deeply for them and for the truths we wrestle with in class, and I'm grateful to continue to be his student.
Thank you. I could begin, of course, just by absolutely affirming everything that Jeff said. I'll give a personal anecdote to kind of begin. My first year of graduate school, I was, as many first-year graduate students are, absolutely terrified. I think the word to describe how I felt after my first semester was disheartened, in the most literal sense. And that was really no one's fault but my own. I had given in to the stress of despair and all kinds of things. And I remember thinking after Christmas, like, I don't think I'm supposed to be here. I don't think I'm good enough. I don't think I'm smart enough. It was a very self-reflective kind of way of evaluating where I was supposed to be. And then in the spring, I came back after Christmas, and I took a class with Dr. Jeffrey and at least one person who's in this room as well, on the Bible and literary theory, and I was so deeply comforted. And the source of that comfort was that it made me forget about myself entirely. It's kind of the comfort you can get from studying geology, right? You think this rock has been in formation for millennia, right? And I remember studying, the way in which the Christian community has come to understand its sacred text, and just the length of time and the conversations happening over centuries, and the way in which Dr. Jeffrey led us into those reflections. I was completely removed. I thought, well, it doesn't matter if I don't understand all of this yet. I'm bearing witness to this amazing, enormous community that I'm so privileged to be a part of. And I would leave class. I remember it was an evening class, and I would drive home, and my mind would be so full I couldn't even bear to turn the radio on, because I couldn't take any more words, coming into my heart or my mind. And I distinctly remember thinking, it's still possible that I may fail this PhD thing, but that doesn't matter at all, because I will not be leaving empty-handed. And I think that was the greatest gift that I could have received at the beginning of that study. As it happened, I did survive the degree with great joy, actually. And a few years later, I was actually already teaching full-time at that point at the University of Mobile in South Alabama. Dr. Jeffrey was speaking at a conference at a university nearby, and he was talking about Christian community and intellectual community, and he said something that really struck me. I'm saying this from memory, so forgive me if I get the wording a little wrong, but he basically said that as a basis for community, tolerance is a pretty anemic virtue compared to the robust demands of love. And I think there's actually pretty wonderful evidence of that tonight. There, as Jeff mentioned, so many of Dr. Jeffrey's former students are here, and part of that is because we admire him, and part of that is because we love each other. And the formation that we were able to encounter through these classes, in many cases, were the foundations of friendships that have endured years, in many cases, and that's not something to be taken lightly. And so I'm very excited and honored that we all got a chance to talk about this, and especially personally, as I have stepped out of full-time academia, which is its own bewildering kind of choice. I'm so happy to say that I did not do it out of fear or that disheartening terror that I felt as a first-year grad student, but I did it out of love, convinced that the love that animates our work in the academy has a place elsewhere as well.
Yes, I also remember the class that Bethany was talking about. However, I was at the time a visiting potential graduate student at Baylor. Not sure. I was debating at the time whether I was going to go to the University of Maryland, which was closer to home, and I'd also been accepted into their program, or whether I was going to go to Baylor. And I decided, okay, if they can prove to me that there's something at Baylor that I can get that I can't get at University of Maryland that is worthwhile, then I will consider it. And after sitting in on that class, I realized that the two parts of my soul that I wanted to bring together, I could do this in an academic community. And I grew up Amish, and so I was used to, excuse me, I was used to having a sort of the religious part of my life in one bucket and the academic part of my life in another. And here was someone who was genuinely interested in the truth in ways that only my agnostic Jewish professor had shown me before. Really, really interested in this, and was going to take where truth led him, but also was very interested in not only the intellectual tradition, but the religious tradition that led us there. And so, like Bethany, I think used the word comfort, and I felt very comforted as well, to the extent that I felt like I don't have to package my life in different pieces. I can try to have a life that is fully integrated with every part of who I am, and become holy in the way that you talked about last night, having that wholeness. A couple other things. So that was obviously I went to Baylor and did a class with him. Jeff was talking about this class. Many times David would sit with us graduate students and talk to us about what we had read and answer our anxious questions and strange questions and every kind of question we might ask. He was very happy to engage us with those. And because he cared about us and our formation, not because we were the brightest students in the world, but because he believed in what we were after, and like I said, he's interested in the search for truth. Also, one of the things that I got to experience while I was there is a breakfast group that several men, along with there are a couple of them here, I think, tonight, who were part of that group. But every morning, or once a week, we would get together and discuss some theological text, not only in an academic way, but sort of in a way of building our personal theology, but also our personal relationship with Christ and that kind of thing. It was really meaningful to me to be able to do that with a professor. Obviously, I'd gone to a state university, and like I said, the closest professor I was with was an agnostic Jew. So it's a very different experience being with Jeffrey. The thing that was similar, I can't keep saying this, but the thing that was similar is they were both interested in truth. And Jeffrey, I was able to ask the questions that my agnostic Jewish professor would turn away from, and was not quite as willing to engage. And I always assumed it was because I wasn't as smart as him. Jeffrey never turned me away because I wasn't as smart as him. So I'm very grateful for that. One of the things that I wanted to do as a teacher is to be a little bit of the kind of teacher that Dr. Jeffrey has been for me. And one of the things that a student said to me recently, he's teaching at Indiana University East right now, it's at a state school, but one of the students told me recently, I have an existential crisis every time I take a class with you, and I just can't stop. And so it's like, okay, I have arrived, this is what I want to do. I want to make you have existential crises and come to a search for truth that has been invigorating to me. And thanks in large part to Dr. Jeffrey and the part he's played in my life. Thank you, Dr. Jeffrey.
Well, I should pick up on the Freudian slip because Dr. Jeffrey actually also was not only very kind to me in class, but also invited my wife to sit in on a number of his classes. So she's actually gotten more from him and more from his classes even than I have, and I got a lot. So I first encountered David Jeffrey through one of his books. I was in one of Ralph Wood's seminars. We were, and one of the books that he had assigned there was People of the Book. And I read it, and I liked it. I had been sort of immersed in some post-structuralist theory in my undergrad, come away with a lot of questions, and all of a sudden I started to see some glimmers of light. There was some hope here that maybe this was not, maybe we could really, text could be really meaningful in ways that I hadn't really thought about before, or in ways that I had maybe vaguely intuited but could not put into words until I started to read the book. And then I had that moment when I took David Jeffrey's seminar. I think it was 14th century spirituality, and we were reading the mystics, and it was a lot of fun. I was sitting in the seminar taking notes and thinking, something he said struck me. I don't know what it was. I've heard that somewhere before. I wonder, oh yes, of course, I read it in his book, and there it was. But anyway, so I first got to know one of the books, and I have to say, also, thank you very much for doing the dictionary on the biblical tradition in literature. That has become one of my go-to Bible study materials. I collect old commentaries out of libraries that are dumping them, and still I go back to that one. It's concise, it's reliable, and it will give you a wonderful overview of so many different topics, and help me situate things. And so I have gone back to that book and sent other people to it time and again. So I'm very grateful for those books. But as David Jeffrey once mentioned to us in a seminar when we were all being very anxious and about publications and how do we do this and get this sent off, and so we're all, as graduate students, are all terrified of the publish or perish mentality, and tenure track people say not as terrified as you ought to be. But David said almost offhand, he said, well, it's really as a teacher that you leave your mark. And I hope I'm finding that to be true. I also remember in that seminar, I think he mentioned that his teaching keeps him sane, especially with all the administrative work you were then doing. And now as a full-time professor, I start to understand that being in the classroom with these people definitely keeps me sane. I also remember having to Dave Jeffrey was also very kind in sitting on my dissertation committee and giving me some very, very helpful feedback on it, including reminding me that it was a bit prolix, which it was. I hope the book version is a little better, but even out of that, I think he's right that it is as a teacher that you leave your mark, and he certainly has. And as the Gospels say, wisdom is justified by all of her children, and you're likely sitting at the table with some of his intellectual, even spiritual children, sometimes grandchildren, and maybe even great-grandchildren. So, thank you.
To quote Milton, I am his child and grandchild both.
That's an awful quote if you know the context. But by way of Phil Donnelly, who's here as well. And some of us, I'm not the only one probably. And what's happening here for those who unfortunately were not students of David Jeffrey is we're moving actually back in time. So maybe I look older than the people that you've been looking at. And through in the order in which we met Dr. Jeffrey. But I'm going to do something a little bit out of order. And I have something to say from Dennis Danielson, who was in the first class David Jeffrey ever taught at the University of Victoria. And he wishes he could be here, but he wanted me to say this. In September 1968, beginning my second year at the University of Victoria, I still needed one more English course to satisfy requirements. However, determined never to be an English major, I avoided the big survey and instead took what I thought would be an easy course in 20th century works, taught by a 27-year-old kid who just arrived with a fresh PhD from Princeton. All I remember about the course was reading lots and lots of Tolkien, listening to the kid brag about understanding Ingmar Bergman in Swedish, visiting his seemingly endless office hours, and realizing that a person of faith who loved intellectual history might actually become an English prof. And he's not just an English prof. I mean, he's Dennis Danielson. Those who are Miltonists or science historians will know the name. I've never looked back, he says, and never ceased to be deeply grateful for that teacher who changed my life. So following that, I had one set of remarks, and now I'm just going to say, I hope, one thing with one anecdote to back it up that I feel moved to share. I was talking with a colleague of David Jeffrey's, Mark Schwain, just 2 days ago. And it was one of those moments where he kind of asked me to distill how I feel about my journey thus far. And I couldn't shut up about David Jeffrey, which is not uncommon with me. In fact, I named my first son after David Jeffrey, so he's been a tremendous influence on me and my husband, whose idea it was to do that, actually. And I said, you know what it is Dr. Jeffrey and also the Lilly Fellows program, but especially him in several key moments, because he'd been such a faithful teacher and guide and shaper of me and now my husband, helped us to have that moment that Bilbo Baggins has where he has to relinquish the ring. And for us, the ring has been that academic ambition to be at the best sort of place doing what the world tells you as an academic you need to be doing. And Dr. Jeffrey told a story to us in his living room about his own career search and a moment where he had offers, as of course he would, from a dozen Ivy League universities, and he had gone on these job searches, and he realized this is a climate where I would get sucked into that way of thinking, and I would need to climb that ladder that ultimately ends in despair. And I'm not going to take the best job I've been offered. I'm going to say no, and I'm going to go to the University of Victoria and teach Dennis Danielson 20th century literature. And that night, my husband phoned up the wonderful but teaching-oriented university where he had a job offer and said yes. He phoned up Dartmouth where he had a campus visit and said no. And I think that changed the course of our lives in a very positive way. And the deeper change in us that led to that decision, even more so. So I want to thank him publicly for that, leading by example.
David's family adopted me years ago, so I have plenty to say about his continued influence on my life. But I want to mention just two small things that influence every single day of my teaching. One is a story from when he agreed to do an independent study for me while he was still provost at Baylor, a job that took a lot of time and energy and sanity and hair, doubtless. Sorry about that. That was it was a time in the middle of my graduate studies, and he took pity on me, decided to do this independent study for me, and let me know that we would have a regular meeting every week, Wednesday mornings, but that sometimes he might be forced to break that appointment. So one week I got an early email in the week from his assistant telling me that we would have to move it. We rescheduled, no problem. And when I saw him at church on Sunday, he apologized, said, so I'm very sorry that you got bumped this week. I was like, oh, I know you have so much going on. You have a lot on your plate. I get it. Not a problem. Like, well, no, that's not it. You just got outranked this time. And I said, Dr. Jeffrey, I am seriously the least important person you meet with during the course of a week. It is not hard to outrank me. And he said, looking at me, he's like, well, that is most certainly not true. But this time it was the President of the United States. being a graduate student, I somehow managed to miss the hundreds of Secret Service people on campus that day. We were wandering around, armed. I don't know what I was thinking. I was there. But when he said this to me, he said it as if he would have only broken our appointment for the president and not for anybody else. It's something I think about constantly because I do teach a lot of classes, of course, and I have very, very polite students. So whenever they have to interrupt what I'm doing, they consider it an interruption and they apologize for it. And I have to always remind myself that these students are the reason that I'm here. There is actually no one more important than they are. And it's a lovely thing to have in the back of my mind always. And David did that for me, and I've always appreciated that commitment. The second thing is something also always with me that has influenced what I teach in the classroom. At one point, David had commented just a very casual setting about having discussed the concept of holiness with a student or group of students at some point, and talked about how the things that we put into our mind, the things we read and watch and see and listen to, have such a dramatic influence on us. And he described it as artwork on the walls of our minds. That has stuck with me, and it's caused me to rethink a lot of things about the way I teach in my high school classroom especially. And as a result, I have quadrupled the amount of poetry memorization I have my students do. We're up to a ridiculous amount of lines now. My students, by the time they graduate, have about 1,000 lines of poetry under their belts. And I'm convinced of the ultimate good of this. And if nothing else, I tell them, if someday you have dementia, you will remember this. It's something lovely to look back on. And that's reason enough. But having these pretty pictures on the walls of their minds, I think, does them more good than any of the other things that I do in the classroom. So thank you for that, David.
Hi, I'm Phil Donnelly, and I think I'm last, so unless there's someone else. Okay. One of the distinguishing features of David Jeffrey, and it struck me the very first meeting as an MA student in 1995, first week of graduate school, and he looked at me and said, "You know there's no money in this." He was right up front. I appreciated that. I think in terms of, and that integrity has marked every aspect of his teaching. The temptation of a David Jeffrey student is the risk of becoming a little bit like, Eeyore imitating Christopher Robin, who finds out that what he does in the mornings, he learns, or he instigates knowledge. And as Eeyore says, "I believe that is the word, but I may be referring to something else." And then he says, "I too, in my way, am doing what he does." And I think the challenge, I think this is what is so amazing with David is the way in which he's able to reveal and share wisdom and the delight in wisdom with others in a way that inspires the students. I would say the most important thing I've learned about teaching in some ways is the importance of reading among friends in the pursuit of wisdom. I'm not a morning person, but one of the things we did, he had a group of friends getting together weekly for reading, discussing a book, and when he found out it was 6:30 in the morning, it was tough for me at first, but it ended up being the source of my real education during my career as a graduate student in many ways. What I learned there, the principles were alternate ancient and modern works, and there are people from a variety of ecclesial backgrounds and professional backgrounds, and there was that sense of analytical rigor and charitable generosity towards one another that became a model for a certain kind of collegium, which eventually resulted in actually this breakfast group's founding a college. I don't know if that happens regularly, breakfast groups that you meet with, but that's one of the things that can happen. So in terms of my own sense of vocation in these things, I think most important thing I've learned is that as people ask me what I do, I said I really just teach people how to read. How to read texts, how to read scripture, how to read their own lives. And when I tell my students, what you're doing here is, if this were a chemistry class, it would only be a matter of life and death. But what we're talking about here is bigger than that. Right? But the reasons for living or dying. Right? And so I've learned that from David Jeffrey. In terms of the way in which grammar is fundamental to Christian formation. So if we all had classes, I would say to toast to David.
Thank you very much. So I hope this has been instructive for those of you who know David and those of you who do not. It would inspire you to be a teacher like him. In about a half hour, so continue to eat and converse, and then the keynote will be David Jeffrey at 7 p.m. in the RCF where you've been